Welcome to the Global War Watch Network, Curious Minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really complex and rapidly evolving situation in a critical part of the Middle East. We've pulled together a stack of recent reports, sources like the New Indian Express, The Week, AP News, Anadolu Ajansa, ACPS, and even some Wikipedia entries on key players. Our mission today is really to unpack these brutal clashes that have just rocked Syria's Sweida province. What actually triggered them? Who are the key groups caught in the middle? And maybe most importantly, what does this all mean for the wider region, especially, after the Assad regime fell just a few months back?
It really is a multi-layered situation. One of our sources actually called it like unwrapping an onion. Apt, I think. We'll be trying to connect the dots here between, well, very local tribal conflicts, the internal dynamics of a pretty significant minority group, the Druze, and, yeah, the interventions of major regional powers. You'll find that these seemingly isolated events in Sweida are actually deeply intertwined with the huge geopolitical shifts happening across Syria right now. Okay, let's start peeling back those layers.
Absolutely. Let's start right there with the immediate headlines, the flashpoint. Our sources tell us these brutal clashes erupted in Sweida province on July 14th, 2025. What was the core conflict? Who was actually involved on the ground?
What's immediately striking here is it wasn't just two sides duking it out. We're looking at a really tangled three-way fight. Initially, the clashes broke out between armed groups from the Druze religious minority and local Sunni Bedouin clans. But then, and this really complicates things, Syrian government security forces also got involved. And
Mhm.
critically, reports say they were actively participating, actually supporting the Bedouin.
Wow. Okay,
Right.
so it's not just government versus rebels or anything simple like that. When government forces are actively backing one side in what looks like a local fight, what does that tell us about their priorities, maybe even their legitimacy in this, new Syria?
That's a really crucial question, isn't it? It suggests that, well, while the new folks in Damascus might talk about national unity on the ground, they seem to be making some very calculated alliances that could easily push other communities away. The immediate trigger, the spark for these clashes, seems to have been a classic tit-for-tat kind of thing. Kidnappings, robberies. Apparently it started when some members of a Bedouin tribe set up a checkpoint. They attacked and robbed a young Druze man, a vegetable seller, and from that single incident, things just spiraled. Retaliatory attacks, and then boom, the violence exploded.
And the human cost. When violence spirals like that, what are the reports saying about casualties?
It's grim. And the numbers, well, they vary quite a bit depending on the source, which really just highlights the chaos, doesn't it? And how hard it is to get solid information. Syria's Interior Ministry initially said something like over 30 dead, nearly 100 injured. But the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, SOHR, they first reported at least 50 dead, including 2 kids, 6 security forces members. Then they updated that to 64 dead. And then an AP News update on July 14th pushed it even higher, at least 89 dead, including 2 children, 2 women, and 14 security forces members. It really raises questions about the true scale. Is it conflicting info or something else going on?
Yeah, that's a stark reminder of the fog of war, really. How did the Syrian government, the official channels, respond, especially given their forces were reportedly involved?
Well, the Interior Ministry called it a dangerous escalation. They sort of blamed it on the absence of relevant official institutions, which, is maybe a bit self-serving. They said they sent forces to restore order. But like we said, reports indicate those forces ended up clashing with local groups and even supporting one side, which doesn't exactly sound like restoring neutral order. Both the defense and interior ministries are deploying people, so they clearly see it as serious.
And internationally. Any significant reactions? Calls for calm.
Yeah, the UN Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Najat Roshdi, she expressed deep concern, standard diplomatic language, but important. She urged everyone to protect civilians, restore calm, stop the incitement. And she specifically mentioned the urgent need for genuine inclusion, trust building, and meaningful dialogue for a political transition. The Syrian Foreign Ministry, predictably, pushed back, called for everyone to respect its authority, stop supporting, quote, separatist rebel movements. So, the usual diplomatic back and forth, but the tension underneath is very real.
Okay, so against this backdrop, we really need to understand one of the key communities here, the Druze. Who exactly are they? What's their history in Syria that makes their position so, well, critical right now?
Right. The Druze are a distinct religious minority. Their origins go way back, 10th century. An offshoot of Ismailism, which itself is a branch of Shiite Islam. In Syria, they mostly live down south, in the Sweida province, that's their traditional heartland. You're also in some Damascus suburbs like Juramana. Globally, maybe around 1 million Druze, and over half live in Syria. You also find significant communities in Lebanon and Israel. Their history has really been about maintaining a delicate balance, fierce autonomy, often navigating complex politics very shrewdly.
A history of self-preservation, it sounds like. Which brings us to a really key point. How has the fall of Bashar Assad's regime just last December 2024, how has that specifically impacted the Druze?
Well, ever since Assad fled, the Druze have been, let's say, deeply suspicious of the new authorities in Damascus. And this isn't just like a feeling, it's a strategic posture, really, born from that long history of needing to maintain their autonomy while powers shift around them. Suspicion of any new central authority is almost their default setting. It reflects this deep commitment to self-preservation, to local control. They've actually clashed with the new government security forces earlier this year already. And during the long civil war, nearly 14 years, they developed their own militias, which tells you a lot about their self-reliance. They sometimes faced brutal attacks, from groups like the Islamic State. And now there's even division within the Druze community. Different factions are arguing about whether to integrate with the new government's armed forces or not, so it's complex internally too.
A community grappling with its own future, then? What are some of their leaders saying? Any prominent voices?
Yeah, Sheikh Hikmat al-Hitri, he's a very prominent Druze spiritual leader, known for opposing the new government. He's actually publicly called for international protection for the community. He's even gone so far as to accuse government forces of supporting Takfiri gangs. That's a term for extremist Sunni militants. That really highlights the depth of their distrust, their fears for the community's safety in this post-Assad era.
Okay, so amidst all this volatility, one of our sources, Wikipedia actually, points to a relatively new player, the Sweida Military Council, or SMC. What is this group? Why did it form?
Right, the SMC. It's an armed coalition, popped up in February 2025, initially called the Interim Military Council. It formed right after Assad's regime collapsed. It was basically a direct response to the security vacuum, concerns after the old Syrian army pulled out of the region. Think of it like a local security force stepping up to fill a void.
And what are they trying to achieve? Their objectives sound pretty broad.
They are quite ambitious, yeah. Their stated goals are, first, protect the Druze community, civilians, public property, just basic law and order stuff. But they go further. They talk about advancing secularism, democracy, and decentralization in Syria. And crucially, they want to stop the new Syrian army, the one under the interim president Ahmad al-Sharaa, from entering Druze areas and causing trouble. They have this vision of a new national army, totally separate from the old regimes, free from foreign influence, inclusive of everyone. And this is key, allowing for local autonomy. It's almost like they're aiming for a kind of, Swiss-style neutrality for Sweida within whatever Syria becomes.
That's a fascinating way to put it. Who's leading this SMC? And who are their main allies?
The main leader is Commander Tariq al-Shufi. He actually defected from Assad's regime way back in 2015. He has a history of dissent. He represented former army officers during anti-Assad protests in 2023. The council itself, it has the endorsement of the Sheikh Al, the top Druze spiritual authority in Syria. And they've even got support from some leaders in RR al-Sham factions, interestingly. Lots of local armed groups have pledged allegiance. And they coordinate closely with Sheikh Hikmat al-Hijri, the leader we mentioned earlier. They even set up a border guard brigade back in April 2025, specifically to deal with threats they saw coming.
Okay, so internally focused, but what about their relationships with other big players in Syria, like the new government or the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces?
Well, they've taken a very firm line against al-Sharaa's authority and against Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. They've explicitly accused HTS of things like ethnic cleansing and tyranny. They said flat out, no place for HTS militias in the future of Syria. Strong words. Now, here's something really interesting. The SMC adopted a flag that looks a lot like the one used by the Kurdish-led SDF. They just tweaked it to highlight Sweida. And they openly said they're willing to cooperate with the SDF. They see them as a force that, defended its own territory against both terrorism and dictatorship. That alignment, even symbolically with the flag, it's a significant strategic move, maybe trying to build alliances with other decentralized anti-HTS groups.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. What about Israel's role in all this? Our sources definitely mention a connection there.
Right, Israel. It's complicated, but clear they're involved.
Right.
Israel sees the Druze within its own borders as a loyal minority. Many serve in the Israeli military, so there's this historical bond, and it often translates into a protective stance towards Druze in Syria. They've intervened before to defend the Druze there. For example, back in May 2025, Israeli forces hit targets near the presidential palace in Damascus. That was seen as a warning after some clashes involving Druze fighters. Netanyahu and the defense minister, Israel Katz, they explicitly said Israel will not allow the deployment of Syrian government forces south of Damascus or any threat to the Druze community.
Yeah.
Pretty clear line in the sand.
And did they act on that during the specific July 2025 clashes we've been focused on?
They did, quite directly, actually. The Israeli army confirmed it struck military tanks in southern Syria on July 14th, right in the middle of these clashes. So, yeah, that absolutely reinforces their stated position. It fits into their broader, more aggressive stance since Assad fell. They seized that UN buffer zone near the Golan Heights, launched hundreds of airstrikes, all framed as keeping Islamist militants away from their border.
So Israel's acting protectively, but how do the Druze in Syria see this? Is Israeli intervention welcomed?
That's where it gets nuanced, definitely. Well, the SMC leader, Tarek al-Shufi, he did publicly thank those supporting the council's position. And that would implicitly include Israel's warnings, and another allied leader has voiced support for Israel. At the same time, it's reported that many Druze inside Syria have said they don't want Israel to intervene for them. So you see this complex, maybe even conflicting dynamic within the community itself. Al-Shufi himself stresses that the new Syrian army must be free from foreign influence, which suggests a desire for self-determination that might clash with external help, even if it's protective. And if you zoom out, Israel's demand for a demilitarized South, well, it's effectively created a power vacuum there, a vacuum that groups like the SMC are now operating in, and frankly, trying to fill themselves.
Right, okay. Let's step back from Sweida itself for a moment. The sources also paint a much wider picture of Syria after Assad, and frankly, it sounds dire. What's the overall humanitarian situation? The economy?
Dire is unfortunately the right word. The opposition offensive that ousted Assad by December 8, 2024, led by HTS and the Syrian National Army, the SNA, it happened incredibly fast. Key cities fell quickly. But it caused massive sudden displacement. Just think about this. Over 1.1 million Syrians were newly displaced in about 2 weeks, end of November to early December. That's huge. While some have gone back, as of mid-December, 880,000 were still displaced. And they're often returning to homes that are damaged, no basic services, and the constant threat of unexploded bombs, landmines, existing camps for displaced people. Overcrowded, totally inadequate.
And the economy, how did it cope with that kind of upheaval?
It basically collapsed. The Syrian pound went into free fall during the offensive. At one point, it hit like 25,000 pounds to the US dollar in Aleppo and Idlib. It recovered a bit after Assad fell, but still, the country's economy is completely fragmented now. You've got different areas using different currencies, Turkish lira, US dollars, the Syrian pound. Imagine trying to run a business or just buy food. Speaking of food, prices for basics like bread didn't just rise, they skyrocketed, up by 900% in some places, and massive fuel shortages. Cooking fuel prices shot up too. It's not just inflation, it's the system breaking down, pushing people to the absolute edge.
That sounds absolutely brutal. What about essential services? Healthcare? Power? How are people getting by?
Barely. Healthcare is incredibly limited. Over a third of hospitals aren't working. There's a critical shortage of doctors, nurses. Basic things like maternal and newborn care are dangerously unsafe. Mental health services, almost non-existent, despite obviously widespread trauma and distress. The fuel shortages paralyze everything, emergency response, getting ambulances to people.
No.
Critical care is often just physically unreachable. Energy infrastructure,
Right.
largely destroyed. Most places get maybe 2 to 4 hours of electricity a day. Think about that. The main refinery at Banyas, it relied on Iranian oil. It stopped working. And sanctions make it really hard to import fuel or even the spare parts needed to fix anything. It's just crisis compounding crisis.
And the longer-term human impact, beyond the immediate crises.
Huge concerns about missing people and the needs of prisoners who've been freed. What happens to them? Families are desperately searching for relatives who were forcibly disappeared under Assad. And chillingly, mass graves have been found near Damascus and other places. It hints at potentially huge atrocities during Assad's rule that are only now coming to light. On top of all that, the aid needed, the international aid, it's critically underfunded. The 2024 Humanitarian Response Plan got less than a third of what was needed. It's a catastrophe happening in slow motion.
So you've got all these different factions, a shattered economy, this humanitarian disaster. What's the realistic outlook for governing Syria now? It seems almost impossible.
It's an immense challenge, yeah. On December 11th, Mohammed al-Bashir was appointed head of the new transitional government. He comes mainly from HTS. Now, HTS does have some experience governing in Idlib province, but scaling that up to the entire country, that's a whole different ballgame. Plus, International recognition is a huge hurdle.
Hmm.
HTS is still designated a terrorist organization by many countries.
Yeah.
That blocks crucial financial aid, investment. So there's a massive uncertainty about whether they can actually transition, from being a militant group to being seen as a legitimate government that's committed to inclusion, democracy. The stuff outlined in UN Resolution 2254 is a massive question mark hanging over everything.
And how does all this instability ripple outwards? What about regional stability?
The risk of new conflicts is incredibly high, either from internal groups who feel excluded, like potentially the Druze in Sweida if things go wrong, or from renewed tensions with the big international players. Iran, Israel, Russia, Turkey, they're all watching, reassessing their positions, their interests. Turkey, for example, is still intensely focused on limiting Kurdish influence in the north. That could easily spark new fighting. Even refugee returns are complicated. The UN Migration Agency warned that if too many refugees return too quickly, it could actually overwhelm the country and trigger more conflict because communities just aren't ready to absorb them. The whole situation really highlights this core, maybe existential challenge. How on earth do you start rebuilding trust? Rebuilding communities that have been fractured by nearly 14 years of brutal war, especially when the basic foundations, governance, security, the economy, are still so incredibly shaky and uncertain.
Wow. This deep dive really shows just how interconnected everything is in Syria. These local clashes in Sweida aren't isolated at all. They connect to the new government's challenges, the humanitarian crisis, the regional power plays. The path ahead for Syria looks incredibly complex, incredibly uncertain.
Indeed. It really underscores why we need to keep paying attention, keep thinking critically. External actions, internal dynamics, they're constantly shaping the lives of millions of people there.
So what stands out most to you about these developments in Syria? We really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer picture of the forces at play and why these events, even seemingly local ones, truly matter. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Please do like, share, and subscribe to the Global War Watch Network, and let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into your sources.